You're listening to Aging Today, the podcast where together we explore the options to aging on your terms.
When I get older, losing my hair, many years from now, will you still be sending me a Valentine? Birthday greetings, bottle of wine. If I've been out till 2:45, would you lock the door? Will you still need me? Will you still feed me when I'm 64?
And now the podcast where together we discuss proactive aging on your terms, connecting to the professional advice of our special guests while creating better days throughout the aging process. Now here's your host, Mark Turnbull.
And welcome to Aging Today. We are the podcast where together we explore the many options to aging on your terms. You can find Aging Today and our 4 years of past programs on our website. All you got to do is type in www.agingtoday.us, and you can follow us on any of our favorite podcast channels such as Spotify, Pandora, Apple Podcast, iHeart, Spreaker, and many others. Finally, I'd like to hear from you, our listeners. We want you to know that the questions that you are asking on the aging process, that's what this show is all about, is to find the answers, and we find those answers through the many guests that we bring on as you listen to Aging Today. All you got to do is contact me, your host, Mark Turnbull, at mark@agingtoday.us. That is, once again, Mark, and that's M-A-R-K. There's no C in that. It's M-A-R-K at agingtoday.us. And I'd love to hear from you so that we can get your questions answered and we can invite the guests on, the experts that you are seeking for the answers to your many, many questions. Well, here on the show today, I'm very excited to have an old friends of ours, let's make that plural. We have Laurence Overmire. Laurence, welcome to Aging Today.
Oh, hi, glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm very excited to hear and to dive into what you do as a genealogist, and right alongside of you is your life partner and partner in crime is Nancy McDonald.
Spouse of all things.
Yeah.
Yes, and glad to be here. We love your show, and we're so glad to be a part of it because it's nice to know that things that we're doing can help the aging process as well.
Yeah, and this is all about a story. So we tell the story here because as we age, the story changes. The plot thickens, if you will. And we're all about telling the story, and what better person to start out with as we tell that story is a genealogist, and then the person that has the words and the verbiage to use to put it together. That's where Nancy comes in, and you spent a lifetime of honing your craft in helping others from, you started on the stage, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Started on the stage for many, many years. And then storytelling has become such a big thing that I realized the skill of an actor is exactly what people need to tell their story. But then it became richer because of the genealogy, and now it's family stories and capturing them so they don't get lost.
Absolutely. And you're just moving from the stage of New York to the stage of life for all of us.
That's right.
All right.
Yes, and I must admit I am aging today as we sit here. So
Yeah. Well, we all are. And that's why we changed. We started out with the name Aging in Portland, and that was a combination of a radio show and a podcast. And then when we went straight podcast, we said, no, that's not going to work. So we got to change the name. And one of the things that I often say is that we're all aging. We're all in the process of aging. And as we age, if you're not too busy aging, if you're not too busy being born, you're aging. And so we want to talk about all the processes and answer the questions because we want to address, infants. We want to address children and adolescents and all the stages of life. There's all kinds of things that pop up. And so we get to address those.
And genealogy kind of brings all of that up. So it's about family. It's about our relationships. And the thing that I keep encouraging people to do is to hand down your story. Make sure that you or someone else writes down your story, even if it's just a page or two, but tell us something about your life and make sure that gets handed down to your children. It's one of the most important gifts that you can give to your descendants.
Yeah, I grew up around grandparents, and I was very fortunate. My mom's side of the family, Grandma and Grandpa Smith, who are no longer with us, but what a fascinating life they lived. He, at the age of 12, he had to go to work, and he had to go to work in the logging industry. And he started out, keeping the bunkhouses warm by cutting wood. That's how he started out. And then he ended up with his career owning his own logging companies and up in Alaska and logged all over the Northwest. And the stories as a kid, we would go over there to spend the night with Grandma and Grandpa when they were back in the area in the off season. And it was just fascinating. My great-grandfather would join them. He also was in the logging industry. He was actually on a locomotive and was badly burned from the steam. Oh. And I remember the three of them telling all the stories of growing up in their time frame. And what a treasure of memories that I have from a different era. And, eras change.
Yeah. Well, and think about it as if you're an explorer. And when you start going back and back and back, and all of a sudden you're in an era where it's the 1600s and they are still in their motherland. They haven't even come to the country yet. And those little nuggets that you find about what they did, they were a mayor or they were a weaver or something. Just anything you can find about them is fascinating.
Yeah, that reminds me of a story of a friend of ours. And we did some work on our genealogy. And she had an ancestor about the turn of the century who was a fireman on a locomotive, and there was a terrible firestorm in Minnesota, and he told the story of how he got people onto the train, and they got running right away, and they went over this bridge, and the bridge collapsed, and he ended up saving a lot of people's lives. And that story became so important to her because it was an incredible story, and she researched it, and he was awarded a medal for the service, and she shared it. Well,
actually, she came to my class and wound up doing her story on the stage at a local theater. And it was remarkable because she felt like she was, in a way, bringing him back, bringing him to them.
Yeah, so this is a case where our jobs intersected here because right. I did the genealogy and then it became a performance on stage, and it was really moving. Yeah. Really well done.
I remember wanting to capture all of my grandfather's stories and my great-grandfather's stories. And we have a recording of my great-grandfather. He was invited up to camp on the way to, I can't think of the name of the restaurant, but it's Camp something.
Oh, Camp 18?
18 or something like that, yeah.
I think that's the number.
And they brought all these, this was like 25 years ago, and they brought all these old loggers together up there.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
And I have the recording of the journalist that was interviewing my great-grandfather, Grandpa Taylor, and he told the story of him working in the woods, and that's what Camp 18 is all about, is, preserving all the memories of the logging industry. If you have not been up to that restaurant,
oh yeah, it's
definitely
a great place.
Go do that.
It's fabulous.
Love that place.
Yeah,
fabulous.
Yeah. So, and it was interesting when you were talking about that. It reminded me of your quote. This is a quote that you made up.
Yeah.
And now people are utilizing it. Go ahead and share with our listening audience because it ties in with exactly what we're just talking about.
Yeah, the quote is from a book I wrote. It's called Digging for Ancestral Gold, and it's basically a how-to book about how to get into genealogy. But the quote is, history remembers only the celebrated. Genealogy remembers them all. And it reminds us that genealogy is really about discovering everyone and honoring everybody and whatever their lifetime was all about, bringing them back and honoring who they were and what they did. And the more you find out, the more it can inspire your own life. So that's why I love the whole journey of doing genealogy.
Yeah, and I never thought of it that way. But when I read that quote of yours, and I began to ponder, and I'm going, that's exactly right. You think of history. History is going to hit the highlights, the high points.
And all the famous people.
And the famous people. But it was the average Joe and Jill, Jack and Jill, that were the ones that actually made those things happen. And they're forgotten.
And those are our ancestors that never get any credit.
Yeah.
So we have an opportunity to bring them back and say, hey, I honor your life. Thank you so much for doing what you did. Yeah. And the more you dig, the more you find out, the more inspiring it becomes, because a lot of our ancestors went through some pretty challenging times. And without question, a lot of them persevered and did some remarkable things so that we're sitting here today.
Yeah.
And that's something that I'm really excited by, is that your story connects with history, that you're part of all the famous history you've ever heard, the wars and the Revolutionary War and creating a country, creating a business, all these stories you're part of. Your ancestors were there at that time, living through some of these same stories.
Yeah, that reminds me of, I did her whole genealogy, Nancy's genealogy, and I did her whole family. And one of her
And this
cousins,
is the McDonald's, right?
This is the McDonald's.
That's right, that line.
Nancy McDonald and her tree. And I came across one of the descendants was a guy who was at the assassination of President Lincoln. He was there in the audience, and then he wrote it down right after it happened. He wrote down the account, and that account is basically the main piece of historical evidence that we have today to document what happened in that event. And it was one of her cousins.
Wow.
Isn't that amazing? I mean, you just never think you're connected in any way. But
How did that make you feel?
well, it just made me feel bigger somehow, that my story had just enlarged. It was no longer, I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, and my parents were, it's a wonderful story, but it all of a sudden became, I'm connected to bigger things.
Yeah, and that's often true in the Revolutionary War, if you can, and a lot of us have ancestors that go back there. And a lot of times you'll find stories that connect you to famous people like George Washington. Mm-hmm. And again, she had an ancestor, his name was Colonel William McDonald, and he was in the Revolution, a colonel in the Revolution. He also fought in the French and Indian War. And in 1778, I believe it was, he gave his land to General Washington for the encampment of his soldiers. So Washington actually was General Knox, who camped on that part of the McDonald land. So they served as hosts to Washington's army. And so you can find out all these amazing things.
I got to tell you why this means so much, because I had no history. My father was from a broken home. I never even knew my grandfather. He met him once when he was in his 40s. Mm-hmm. So that whole story, all the McDonalds, everything about them was a blank. And I thought it wasn't important. And I used to tell him it was like finding a McDonald in a haystack. But he did. He broke through all the brick walls, and all of a sudden my story got bigger and bigger and bigger. My brothers, oh my gosh, my one brother was just like, he was so self-important. He thought that was amazing. But the funny thing is, and the important thing is, we all have stories like that. We all connect. And we have billions of grandparents and ancestors.
Another interesting thing about that is everybody in the descendants of that particular ancestor had been cut off from their ancestry. So nobody living knew the story. And so when I finally broke through the brick wall, and it took like 10 years of a lot of work to try to get through it, but when I finally did break through it, I suddenly connected all these descendants that never knew their history before. And that's another one of those things that is just remarkable about doing genealogy. Yeah. Bringing people together.
Yeah. And it's interesting. In this day and age, we seemed, and I don't want to get too political, but I see what's happening in our culture today where we're trying to erase the history. And especially the warts.
Yeah.
And I just find that so abhorrent. outpouring that we're, what is it that about us that when we look to the past, and the past always isn't rosy, but why blame those people? Because that's the best they knew.
That was the culture.
It was a different time.
It's misguided too, because we have so many ancestors. Some of them will have done terrible things. Some of them will have done remarkable things. And most of them will have just lived their lives, good lives, raising their children, living the way that they see fit, and then whatever religious belief. I mean, if we hold on to divisions, what, are you going to hate your ancestors just because
it
they
doesn't make any
were
sense.
a different religion?
But that's where they're trying to take us, and I just find that you're just so short-sighted. And you know, the one thing that I look at when we look at the past, there's not everything I've done in my past has been good.
Yeah.
Right? So, but I'm a better man today because of my misfortunes or the wrong decisions, the wrong judgments that I've made in my past. I'm a better man today. Why can't we look at that as a society and embrace that same thing?
And one of the reasons I really started getting into genealogy was to learn more about history, because basically what all of us get is kind of a cursory teaching of history as we're in school. But when you really dig into history, then you begin to see all the really wonderful things and all the warts too. So there's good and bad. And I agree with you. I mean, we shouldn't blame people that are not living today. That was a totally different time period. And when you get more into the history, you understand more about where they're coming from. They were different kinds of people. They had different beliefs. And then you also begin to accept them. Hey, that's the way it was. And, you know, my task today is to try to be a good person so that I respect and be kind to everybody around me. And that's what I try to focus on as a human being.
I just wanted to, that made me think of something. We do this all the time. We bounce off each other, and that made me think of a point.
That's why you're the most interesting couple.
Well, what it made me think of is that so many of our ancestors' stories change at a certain point in history, and it always kind of makes me sad when we look at the early founders of America. We learn that they move. They don't stay in one place. They move. And often they move with their entire family. Whole families will gather together and move to the West, or move to the farmland, or move to a new town. And bit by bit, you see they stay together, they intermarry into cousins and things because there just weren't that many people. And then the Industrial Revolution starts, and all of a sudden, the families are separated and they don't even know each other. And then this family moves to California and they never talk to the rest of the family. So everything changes. And that's, I think, why these stories aren't getting handed down, because we don't know our families anymore. I couldn't have told you who my grandparents, my great-grandparents, it's hard to realize. But when you start doing genealogy, and that's what we're saying, I think, to your listeners, is don't wait. If you have a question, there are so many opportunities now for you to go online. Other people may have researched your same family tree. People like Larry, he gets emails, hundreds of emails in a week. Do you know this, or do you know how this, and blah, blah, blah. And these are all his family, but he's got thousands of family members now. So it becomes fascinating. You just don't want to let it go. I asked him years ago, when do you think you'll be done with this? And he said, pretty soon. Well, you're never done, because you're just opening up new doors.
Well, the story, you're continuing to write the story.
That's it.
Yeah, right.
Your
It's
story
never ending,
to help others to write their story, and to tell now Nancy's side, to tell the story, and to choose the words, the verbiage that it takes, and to pass those on.
Yeah.
You know, in the 1600s, 1700s, I'm sure all the way through history, up until the Industrial Revolution, now we're much more fractured and we're doing things differently, which is fine. There's, I guess it's just part of, now we got to figure out other ways to capture the past, so that other generations can learn from our mistakes and find out, well, where did we all come from?
And actually, it's a lot easier now because we have technology. So you can create films really easily now, and you just do an interview with your grandparents or a special loved one, and just put them on video and share it with the family, and you can hand down stories that way. So and computers have made writing a lot easier too, and you don't have to deal with all the paperwork, which was a real headache for genealogists in the past because it was all this paper. But now you can do it really efficiently on the computer.
And then with photographs, to mark them, to say who's in this photo, because we take hundreds of digital photographs now, and it's got a number. It doesn't even have a title. So put on that who's in it, what the date was.
And the great thing that's happening now with all this technology is that when you do have those pictures, you can digitize them, you can put them online, and you can share them with the entire family. So your distant cousins who never saw a picture of their third great grandmother suddenly can say, there she is.
Yeah.
And they can see what she looked like.
That's exactly where our family is. We just had a meeting. My mom and dad are 91. They still live in Hillsboro, Oregon, and in the same house that I grew up in. And they're still motoring around. They met us at Domaine Serene, and Dad drove, and I'm going, okay.
You're so lucky to have
Oh, my goodness. Yeah, we got the genes. Hopefully they'll pass on. But it was interesting. I got my brothers and sister together, and so I went over to Mom and Dad's, and they've got 2 big boxes of slides and movies that Dad took, and so we're in that process of digitizing.
Yeah.
So I'm in that process of trying to find the right company to go get them digitized. What do you recommend? Do you have any recommendations on that?
Well, we used a company, but I don't remember the name.
Well, here's the thing. If this is what brings the generations together, if you have a tech-savvy person that has a regular old printer scanner from today, I have digitized so many family photos, et cetera, so you can do photos and stuff yourself just with a scanner. But we went to
off a slide?
Well, not a slide, no, but a photograph.
Photographs,
yeah.
Prints.
But slides and videos, there are companies that's all they do.
Yeah.
That's what they specialize in. So if you went to Google, put in your zip code, and looked for some of those companies, we had one that took old VHS tapes of our old work in like soap operas and things like that. And we were like, we want to save them, but the VHS tape is big. So they put them all on DVDs, and they were having a special. It wasn't a big expense at all, but it was worth every penny just to keep those.
To capture those.
Yeah, I'm so glad
moments.
you brought that up.
Okay,
Yeah.
and I'm looking at a company, Legacy Box, and I was curious if you guys had heard about that.
Well, Legacy is well, you were going to talk about this because Legacy is a software where you can keep all your records. And
This might be
it's
something
like a
else, though,
big
that he's
database.
talking about.
Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah, they'll take and all of your slides
Oh, that's something
and
different.
digitize all your movies, your home movies from
Is
the
that local?
60s. No, I'm not sure where they're at. They're maybe in Texas or something.
Okay.
But
Because there's also a legacy.com or a legacy software for genealogy, and I wonder if they're connected.
Yeah.
They might be.
I don't know. It's something to find out.
Yeah.
But anyhow, so back to the genealogist, and I'm really interested in how far you've been able to go back into time. And you said that you did a lot of research on Nancy's family, the McDonalds. And I just came off of watching Outlander. Have you seen that?
Oh, yeah.
And that's all about the McDonalds.
You
right?
know- Well, you know what's funny? He has.
Oh, I got sucked into that.
He has more Scottish ancestry than I do, but his surname is German. I have more German than he does, but my surname is Scottish. So you can't go by your name.
Yeah, that's the other thing about genealogy. It'll change your idea of who you thought you were.
Yeah.
And like she said, I thought I was basically German because my father's line was German and my mother's line was German in her father's side. But when I did all the research and then when I did the DNA testing, I find out that mostly I'm British Isles, so England, Scotland, Ireland. I've got a chunk of German, but it's not as big as I thought it was. So it changes your whole idea of who you are. And yeah, we go right back to Scotland on a lot of my lines.
Yeah, and that's mine too.
Yeah, and I love the history. Right? I've become a real Scottish, what is it, file? Scottish file?
Scottish
if there's such a word.
I want to just interject here. It's a difficult time right now because of the pandemic, and it has caused a lot of like freeze in place kind of things. In the past, I would have said, get on a plane and go to Scotland. We did that, and it was just a remarkable journey. We may be able to do that again one day soon, but at this point, people can find out so much from their armchair. They can go online, they can see videos of Scotland, they can take a drone tour of the British Isles, and I highly recommend it because you start to feel like, oh, well, this is where they would have lived. This is what they would have seen. And for you being a Scot, yeah, watching things like Outlier. We love the documentaries. We're just watching movies about Cromwell and Charles I, and all of a sudden it's
but
like we're there.
For those who are aging, though, I should bring up this point that another wonderful thing about doing your genealogy and knowing your family history is that almost any place you go, you're going to have some kind of personal connection to it. And the more you study the history, and you'll go back to Scotland and you'll know where your ancestors were, where the clans were. And then you can go there and it will have a heightened resonance for you. I mean, I know it did for me because I visited all the places I'd studied beforehand and I found out about my ancestors. But it really is a powerful, moving experience that you won't have otherwise.
And even closer to home. I didn't know where my ancestors were from, so we found they were from Indiana. We traveled to Indiana and we traveled to New Jersey and all these places that I never knew I had a connection to, and all of a sudden they're home to me, so it changes. Even where you've been, I lived in New York City for years. I never knew going to Jersey would be so exciting.
By the way, Mark, did you get to Scotland?
No, I haven't, and that's on my bucket list.
Love it.
The name, I don't know if we've talked about this before, but the name Turnbull, we did some, obviously, research on that, and it is Scottish. The king at the time,
Robert the
Bruce, one of his favorite pastimes was bull hunting. So they were out bull hunting. He had his entourage, his peasants, if you will. And one of the peasants, he shot a bull, drew back the arrow, wounded the bull. The bull charged Robert the Bruce. And the peasant stood between the bull and the king and saved his life. And that's where he said, okay, your name now is Turnbull because he turned the bull away from the king and I saved the king. That's the line.
Yeah, that's a great story.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and very intriguing. I think that was back in the 1600s.
It'll be 1300s.
1300s, yeah. So it goes back quite a ways.
Oh, yeah.
And there's Turnbulls. There's not many Turnbulls. There hasn't been that many Turnbulls that I've been aware of, but then you start digging in and you finding out that they have these, big family reunions, the Turnbulls, and they'll get together here in the United States and they'll take up an entire hotel.
Oh, yeah.
That's something else for people who are aging and may feel alone or isolated or something. There are whole organizations based on your name. I guarantee it. There are now with Ancestry, so many people are finding their DNA and their cousins and who's out there. So even online, you can find people and they have interesting stories and they connect to your story. And all of a sudden you're proving, well, this story that Aunt Marge always told about, being connected to so-and-so is true because they were too. And so you can find all the paper trails that prove your validity.
So going back to my original question, how far have you been able to dig back into history in time?
Yeah.
Time-wise?
So first understand that your tree is astronomical. It's huge. And if you think about every person in your tree has a huge tree themselves, and you're only going to be able to find a very tiny part of it, because that's all you're going to be have access to. Most people are really lucky if they can get back to the 1500s. A lot of people can get back to the 1600s in America, particularly at the time of the Mayflower. So there's a lot of records that were kept back then, which makes it great for all the descendants because they can a lot of times trace their ancestors back there. The hardest part is getting from America overseas. So finding that ancestor and where they came from overseas is very difficult. There are some, we call them gateway ancestors, that are readily known by a lot of people because they've been traced. And a lot of those are typically more of the upper class, the aristocrats, because they kept track. And the aristocracy kept track throughout time because land was very important. Who gets the wealth is very important. So those are the trees that usually you can dig back farther. And most normal people, so-called commoners, will go back to about 1500 if you're lucky. If you're really, really lucky, you get back to the 1400s, and that's when the surnames start, really, in the 1400s, about 1450.
What's a surname?
A surname is the last name.
Okay.
So yours is Turnbull,
Yeah.
mine's Overmire, hers is McDonald. And they really start, they started in some places earlier than that, but typically it's about 1450 or so when they really start becoming kind of normal. But if you can find those people, you're really lucky. The aristocrats, on the other hand, those trees are recorded all the way back. So what you're going to find is if you connect to one of those aristocratic ancestors, and we probably all of us have them in our tree if you can find them, but if you connect to even one of them, it's probably going to go back to Charlemagne, who was the father of kings back in France and Germany at about 690 AD. And he's about the one ancestor that's pretty much common to all of the aristocracy of Europe. So for British people, a lot of times you'll get back to William the Conqueror, who came over from Normandy in 1066 and took over England and the British Isles eventually. But so he goes back to Charlemagne too. But Charlemagne is kind of the common ancestor for an awful lot of people. And a lot of genealogists believe, because of the mathematics of it, that most people in Western civilization are descended from Charlemagne.
Okay, and we're talking primarily the part of the world that's European.
Yeah,
ancestry.
so Western civilization, European.
Yeah. Have you done much with Asian populations?
Yeah, so Asian would be a whole different thing, but you're going to come across the same kind of thing where the aristocrats you can trace back because they have records, but the common people, you're going to get stuck. And usually, as I say, if you can get back to 1400, you're really, really lucky. So usually it could be 1800, it could be 1700.
And the true heartbreaker for me is I kept my surname, but that is a rare occurrence. And women
That was one of my
hard.
questions.
Really?
Yes.
Because women are so hard to trace. They disappear.
When did we start trading our names? When the man was lucky enough to find the most beautiful woman on the planet, right? And then the two shall become one flesh. When did they start trading, taking the woman taking on the man's name? Is there any history to that?
That goes back pretty far. The men were the people who owned the wealth, and
right.
Women really didn't have that opportunity.
Yeah.
So it really goes a long, long way back in time, and it wasn't until recently.
But it was centered around property rights.
Yeah, property rights and wealth.
Yeah.
And the women only recently got access to that kind of thing. That's why we're seeing change all the time here in the 21st century.
Yeah. Yeah, because when in this day and age, and it's so neat that you kept the McDonald name, because there's an identity there that if you take on Larry's name, then you've lost a little bit of that that ancestry with the McDonalds.
And he was encouraging to say, you've been this name for so long, it's your name, and it might have been different.
I think most of us identify with the name we're given as a child, that male surname that's been handed down. And I always encourage people to find the female lines, because that's where a lot of your ancestral gold lies. And ancestral gold are those nuggets of ancestral history that are so wonderful to discover, and they open up whole new parts of yourself. But find the female lines, and a lot of times those lines get ignored. A lot of times the ancestors of the females don't get handed down, and it's a real tragedy. But I always, as it is, as I say, genealogy is about remembering the people, and I like to honor all those women that have gone before. And actually in our DNA, we have what's called the mitochondrial DNA, which is a line of DNA that's handed down from the mother to her children, and it goes all the way back in time. So
Mother to
basically,
mother to mother.
the line of the mothers. And then you have the Y DNA, which is the line of all your fathers. So that's pretty amazing right there, that you have those two lines coming down to make you who you are today.
You're listening to Aging Today with Mark Turnbull and his guests Laurence Overmire and his wife Nancy McDonald. Laurence is the author of Digging for Ancestral Gold. We'll hear more of this discussion about exploring your ancestral roots in just a moment.
Sometimes I'd like to smack old age right in the kisser. Ow!
Oh yeah, still got those moves.
I will be fabulous.
Comfort Care can help with as much or as little home care as you need. From medication reminders and meal prep to everyday chores and errands. Let us create your personalized care plan and find the perfect caregiver match so you can live your best life possible.
Call Comfort Care at 503-636-0417.
A Did You Know moment from Comfort Care Home Care of West Lynn.
Did you know Aging Today guest Laurence Overmire has a quote that's been shared all over the internet and on Ancestry.com? It goes as follows. History remembers only the celebrated. Genealogy remembers them all. He reminds us, genealogy is about honoring and remembering all those who have gone before. Every human being has an important story worth telling. This Did You Know moment is brought to you by Comfort Care Home Care of West Lynn. Call today, 503-636-0417.
Now, more of our conversation with Mark Turnbull and his guests Laurence Overmire and his wife Nancy McDonald, and the book Digging for Ancestral Gold, right here on Aging Today.
And so you used an interesting phrase, the gold.
Yeah, I call it ancestral gold because
Okay.
it's rich.
Yeah.
And it's like being an archaeologist. You're uncovering the past. You're trying to discover who these people were. And the book's about how to go about it and how to get started. And
The
a lot of good
subtitle
advice.
actually is The Fun and Easy Way to Get Started on Your Genealogy Quest. He's got so many tips and tricks and ideas and resources in this book. It's really helpful, especially for somebody who's just getting started. And I've had he teaches genealogy workshops, and often the hardest thing about the genealogy workshop is he starts by giving information, and we start tracing some people, and there's 5 or 6 people before long they're all just telling stories, and we can't get anything done because the stories are so fun.
Yeah, it's great at parties because everybody has a family story to share and just get them started.
But by
talking.
getting the book, he has things. Well, he does it all like a treasure map. And so your treasure map is who you know already in your ancestry, your grandparents, your great-grandparents, and then he has little treasure tips as you go. And it's just really helpful. So.
Well, let's start with the book because I want my listening audience to hear that there's a resource out there.
Right.
That's why you're on the show today, and you and Nancy. And so let's take a deep dive and let's dig a little bit into the book and tell us a little bit about why you wrote. What was the motivation for writing the book, and who's it written for? And then let's dig into some of the breakdown of the book and how this book can help people discover who they are.
Right. Yeah. So that's actually why I wrote it, because I wanted a quick, easy book that's not too difficult, that gets people involved, gets them started down the road of genealogy if they have interest. And so the book really covers, philosophically why it's so interesting to look for your ancestors. And that's a lot of what we've been talking about today. And then how to do it. And what I really recommend, first of all, is that people get a software program on their computer, because the computer has really revolutionized how to do genealogy, and it gets really easy. It replaces the old paper and pencil, thing that we used to happen as we were working on genealogy. So a software program is good. It gets you started, and you just start entering the facts, the births and the deaths, and then you can note the source. Maybe it's a gravestone, maybe it's an obituary, but just to get you started and going back generation by generation. And then I give you some really good tips on where to find information about those ancestors in your past.
Do you have a software that you recommend, or have you created one?
There's a whole bunch of them out there, and they're all basically comparable. But I always recommend that you do your research and find out a little bit about them. And I don't like to plug any particular one, but they're all kind of competitive.
Yeah.
And they are mentioned in the book. I just wanted to go, since I designed the back cover, he talks about what you're going to explore in the book. And I'll just go through a few of these things, but it's how to create your own treasure map, what tools you will need to get started, an easy 6-step plan to find your ancestors, how to prove relationships, how to source your materials, a list of helpful resources, copyright law, plagiarism information, publishing and sharing information, how DNA can help, and basically how genealogy will change your world and blow your mind. So,
and it will too.
It will.
It does mine. I just love it. I can't get enough of it.
Obviously, I can't either.
Yeah. You spent a lifetime.
Oh yeah, it's a non-ending passion. It just keeps going on.
Well, but the passion has become larger because he finds that we've done this twice now, where he's worked for clients on their family history, and then found they connect to his or they connect to mine. And all of a sudden, this client that we didn't even know has become our cousin. It just, once you start going back in time, there weren't that many people, living in a certain area. And so if your ancestors go back to that same area, it's pretty likely you'll be related in some way.
Yeah, and truth is we're all cousins. We just don't know how far back in time the common ancestors are.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm curious where all three of us have some connections to Scotland.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting, yeah.
So maybe there was some crossover there that we don't know.
I wouldn't be surprised if we had clans in common.
Yeah.
Because if you do a lot of your genealogy, you're going to find out that you're not just related to Turnbulls. You've also got all these other clans through, especially the female lines that you might not know about.
Right.
But they're all different clans. And
But then what's fascinating is the mystery. Because you have your DNA done. My brother had the DNA done because you have to have a male do it for the Y DNA. But all of a sudden you find, and I knew that I had a great-grandmother who was Jewish. I have 7% Jewish DNA in me. Larry finds he has Turkish and Middle Eastern all of a sudden. And then you become fascinated because it's like, and this could be ancient, it could be far away, it could be recent, but to know that you're part of a bigger picture. You're not just one line that was from one country. You're from all over.
Yeah, I think that that is so important because it brings a self-awareness of a self-esteem, a pride.
Yes.
Think of the things that does to you as an individual, that you are part of a bigger picture. And that, I think sometimes in our culture today, we become so microscopic on and looking at ourselves and woe is me. And we think the world is all about me. But no, we're part of a bigger picture of many, many people.
Right.
And how exciting is that?
And I just want to emphasize that point because I find that doing the genealogy is actually a healing process, that it does make you feel connected. It opens your heart and you really start to feel love for all these people. And I'm no longer focusing on my own ancestral tree. I've done a lot of research on it, but I'm focusing on other people. And it's just as fascinating as my own personal history. Yeah. And I consider everybody's history, part of my own because we're all cousins. So it's equally fascinating. And I'm learning about history constantly.
Yeah.
And it's just a wonder.
I love the story and the connection to Abraham Lincoln, to the McDonalds. That is really fascinating. Is there a story similar to your past in history with?
Well, I got a famous ancestor, Governor William Bradford of the Mayflower, who was the key figure who wrote a book of Plymouth Plantation, which is the main history that tells us about the Pilgrims and their whole story. And so he's my 10th great grandfather. So that kind of connection resonates in me today, and I kind of honor, his story and what he did and what he accomplished.
Yeah, and did he get into the history of why he left England?
Oh yeah, he talks about the whole Pilgrim experience. He wrote what was a fascinating story. He wrote the history as he lived.
Yeah,
and it got lost. It was handed down to another ancestor of mine who was, I think, his grandson or great-grandson, also William Bradford. And then it got lost. And it was discovered many, many years later in somebody's library in England. And then it came back to life in America. And I think this was in the 1800s. And they found it again. And then there was this big interest in, the Pilgrims and the whole history. So it was one of the most important books ever written in American history.
Yeah.
And again, you talked about this just a short while ago, Mark. We hear a story about, Pilgrims, Thanksgiving, we learn broad strokes. But the nuances, what he told in this book, the connections of the native peoples and the peoples who came here, it changes how you look at it and how your own ancestry connects with other peoples. And it just makes it bigger.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the important part of it.
Yeah.
And I love that. And it shows how we're all connected to each other.
Yeah.
Right.
And hopefully learning that, discovering it, makes us better people today somehow. Somehow we learn from the mistakes of the past. We learn from those things that aren't so great. And we make an effort to let's get along together today and make this world as good as it can be.
You also help other people to start digging for their own gold, their ancestral gold.
Yeah, I get questions all the time from people, and I'm busy answering those. I've got a whole database online that I've done. My whole tree is on there and all the connections, and so all the people that connect are going to find a lot of really good information. There's also a great site I want to mention. It's called Find a Grave, and it's a site that shows cemeteries, and it's got memorials for the people buried in those cemeteries. So it's a great resource for anybody who's looking for their ancestors. Go to Find a Grave, put the ancestor's name in the search engine, and just see if they're out there. Because what you can do as an individual is honor that person by writing a biography or posting a photograph of them. So it's a great way to memorialize your ancestors, and it helps all kinds of other people too at the same time.
Here's where you just talked about helping other people. So that when he started doing genealogy, all they had were names and where the people were buried. Then it started being people finding their ancestors and wanting to honor them. But do you know they have people that volunteer to go to those cemeteries, take a picture of the tombstone, and email it to anybody who, you just ask, could somebody go to this grave? And there are volunteers who go and do that, and then you have a picture. You don't have to travel to that cemetery, but you can see their grave. And it gets you. It really... when you see an ancestor's tombstone, it really gets you.
Yeah, I grew up in a family where, Memorial Day we celebrated by going and visiting the grave sites. And I learned so much about my ancestors. And as Mom and Dad would tell the story, we'd go from tombstone to tombstone to tombstone, and this person was related to that person. And most of our family is buried over in Astoria, but there's other places as well. And I find that to be fascinating. And ever since I was a little kid, tell you a little bit about myself and maybe how morbid I am. I love going to cemeteries. And it sounds morbid, but it's I love going and reading the tombstones because there's a story that can be told by, if you go to some of the grave markers up in Astoria, they've got fishing boats on the gravestone, or they've got a carpenter on the gravestone. Right away, that tells you something about that individual.
That's right.
And my favorite tombstone that I've read is in a windswept little cemetery in eastern Oregon, and on the gravestone it said, "She's gone, and oh how I miss her."
Oh, man.
And right away, there's a story.
Oh,
there's a story about these two people that were so in love with each other that now they're separated for forever. And he expressed how he felt about his loved one. And it's just very moving.
Yeah.
And what an honor.
Larry all the time says all people want is just a snippet of a story. The dates, the birth dates, the death dates, those are facts. In fact, I have a quote that I borrowed and stole from many other people, but my paraphrase of it is, the queen died, the king died. Those are facts. Mm-hmm. The queen died, the king died of a broken heart. That's a story.
That's a story. Oh, I love that.
And it's just what you said, just that same idea from a tombstone.
And I find even on the tombstones, the fact part of it is the birth date and the death date. And when I see that, I go, oh, they lived a long life. They lived 80 years for that time frame. That was remarkable. And then you see another tombstone where it was a year or two. Right. And then you go, wow, I wonder what that story was, why the time frame was so short.
It really gets
your mind starts
you start
going.
To feel connected, don't you?
Yeah, and you just wish that there was a screen that pops up and tells that story of that individual.
Well, that's what Larry does. That's what he's trying to do.
Yeah, that's right. To see if you can find more about that, because that piques your interest.
Yeah.
And then I might go online and put that guy's name in for the tombstone you found. I'd put the name in. If I know the girl's name, put that in too. See if I can find them and find out what that story was, because it might be out there.
Yeah.
You never know.
Yeah, it'd be interesting, and you never know.
Yeah.
What the story was. So, and then I think telling the story is so important, and then passing that on and telling the story is extremely important. And Nancy, that's where you come in. And I love the title of your company. It's called Juggling Feathers, and that's pretty descriptive. But explain to our listening audience about the company that you founded, Juggling Feathers, why you named it Juggling Feathers, and what is it that you do?
Well, I named it that because in acting, when you teach acting or study acting, they often use the idea of juggling, that you have to learn your lines, then you have to do this, and it's like throwing different balls up in the air. And you can do it. There's a discipline. But then I say communication is like juggling feathers, because try to even picture doing it. One goes over here, one goes over there. It doesn't go where you thought it was going to go. So people kind of got caught onto that, like, oh yeah, because I experienced that. And it sort of got people over the fear of, well, I'm not really going to juggle feathers. I'm just going to go and fail at telling a story, and that'll be, and then they realize they don't fail at all, that a story is just those magical things where you don't plan it out, you don't write it, you don't read a story. You're sitting on the back porch. I'm sure when we finish this recording, we're going to sit with you and tell stories. It's just, you just do it without thinking. And so the best way to record your story is, I'll give you an example. My brothers were both in their 70s, and we just had a Christmas gathering, almost like a reunion. I have a very big family, and there were different, my parents had gone, and so my brothers were getting older, and Larry had the idea that we were all sitting around, and there were various generations, and we would just have my brothers tell stories, and he would record it. Well, everybody gathered round. They were so funny, and they were so wonderful and warm. And so we made a little video of that and called it The McDonald Boys, Don't Tell Dad. That was the title. Well, both my brothers are gone now. My eldest brother died December. And we now have that video to put, and things are different now, technology-wise. Before we had to make a DVD and try and get it to somebody. Now I'm going to upload it to Dropbox or some sort of connection where anybody in the family will be able to find it and see it. And that way, decades from now, dozens of generations from now, they'll not only be able to know who these two men were, but they'll see them. They'll hear what they sounded like. They'll be able to see their sense of humor and how funny they were. So you can do that with your family. You know, just a gathering. Those of you who want to offer your services, who know technology better than your, say, 91-year-old parents might, turn on the phone. Just start recording. The other thing is now with Zoom, everybody's Zooming. Well, you can Zoom yourself. You could just turn on a meeting, start recording, tell your story, and you've got it. And then you can send that to your family, just so they know the details, so they know the facts, so they understand what happened. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be an actor. You don't have to be skilled at storytelling. You just have to want to give people the facts and let them know who you were, or tell a story about your great-grandfather. And Larry puts his into poems. He's got poetry that actually is a story about his grandparents and what they did and where they went and stuff like that. So whatever you like to do to tell stories, do that, only just capture it, record it.
Let it come out through your personality.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So I'm always intrigued by people that can go to a party, you know, and or just sit down and have a conversation, and they're wonderful storytellers.
Raconteur.
Yeah, those were her brothers. They were phenomenal.
Yeah, and then there's people like me that I can't tell anything that captures the imagination of people. And what's in a story? What is it?
See, usually we are looking from our inside out. Oh my goodness, they're seeing this, they're seeing that, they're going to judge me, rather than, oh, they don't know about this. And they may never know that Uncle so-and-so had this. Oh, and whatever tickles you, what makes you laugh, what you think is funny. There was a woman in my class when we could still meet in person at Lakewood, and she came with a piece of dishware. And she said, I want to be able, I know they don't care about it, but I want to be able to tell my family about this dishware and what it means. And so over the weeks, she just told us more about it. We would get fascinated. We would tell her what we thought was exciting, and then she would add to it. And she went for a holiday visit and wound up telling the story, and she wrote to me afterwards and said it was a wonderful success, that it just, made her feel so good to be able to share that with her family. And a lot of people think, well, they're not going to care. Well, maybe they don't care yet, but as soon as you're gone, they're going to say, oh my gosh, why didn't I get that story? I should have asked this, I should have done that. So do it for them. Do it for them. Leave it for them. Write it down. You don't have to tell them in person.
Yeah. My grandparents were great storytellers, and my great-grandfather. And I think one of the ingredients that I saw in them is that they didn't get too detailed and start rambling on.
Yes.
But they would just really briefly describe the scene, describe it in a few words. And that triggered in me, engage in where I could be transported into their story. Yes. And to me, that's kind of the mark of a great storyteller.
Well, and you made me laugh because I thought you're the only person I know who doesn't think he's a good storyteller, who has his own radio podcast.
Yeah. Well, I'm just a host. You guys tell the stories.
Well, but here's the thing. Everybody has their own skill. the thing you don't want to do is go and study public speaking and become slick and, well, the formula for a good story is this and that and this and that. Part of the fun of watching my brothers tell their stories is my brother Mike would go on and on and on, and then Paul would just interject his little things because he was just like, I was there too, you know, and it was just so funny. Because,
and that's not the way I remembered it.
Yes, exactly, exactly. So it. However you talk, we tell stories all the time. I go to the grocery store and I come home and I talk about what happened. You know, it's just we don't think about it.
Yeah.
It's when we get put on the spot and we're trying to remember things. So jot down notes, jot down little, you know, reminders to yourself.
Yeah. And I think what a great start at a party when you're with groups of people is that if you can intentionally weave into the evening story.
That's right.
And give everybody an opportunity to tell their story. And do you have any ideas on, you know, for our listening audience, if they were going to go to a party, what kind of questions you would ask, you know?
Are you talking about a party with your family?
Yeah, it could be a family or it could be some friends that you're getting together with. And maybe a fun little exercise would be to say, hey, let's learn about each other a little more.
Well, usually it works better when it's not so on the spot. You don't put somebody on the spot. Your goal is the same. You want to learn about each other. But you might start with a story that it's like, hey, I remember a story. There was a story about you and Paul taking Dad's new car and getting mud all. What was that story? And then they start telling, and then there's not a huge crowd at first, but then people start coming, and then people ask more stories. You know what? I want to. Do you remember your dad? And we were at a Christmas gathering, and he had his camera. I'm pointing to Laurence now. He had his camera on, and his father had never ever talked about an experience he had in World War II when his ship was kamikazed. He asked a simple question, and for the first time, his father told that story. He told it so long with tears pouring down his face, the whole family just like riveted until we ran out of battery and film and we couldn't record anymore. But it's just stuff like that where it comes out of nowhere. So it's good to plan it. We planned the brother story, but it's also good when it just comes out of nowhere and you've got somebody there ready to record it.
Yeah, yeah. Do you remember that?
Yeah, it was really meaningful for me. I'd never heard the story before. I'm going to break up about it if I keep talking about it. But
I got tissue right there.
Yeah, but it's these are the family stories that are so rich and meaningful that if you just take the time. And that's what a lot of us miss. We just don't take the time to do this really important and meaningful work because it can really change.
And that's a connection too for all of our family members who have been in the military over the years. They may think that their stories aren't important or that they don't want to tell them or it takes them back to a time they don't want to think about. But anything you can leave behind, the family wants to know. They find that a treasure. They find that an honoring, just a way to say, my uncle did this or my grandfather did that. You know, it's just so they know, just to help them.
Is there any way for our listening audience to be engaged in your classes?
Oh, yeah, sure. Well, I have a website, which is jugglingfeathers.com. And I have my classes listed there. But I also do a lot of Zoom coaching now. And so anybody can contact me through that website. You can send me an email and we'll just talk about it. I've done private coaching where I just Zoom or Skype with someone for an hour and give them some ideas. So, yes, please feel free to contact.
All right. And Laurence, for our listening audience out there, you're an author. Genealogist. I want to talk a little bit more about some of the other books that you've written. I mean, this Digging for Ancestral Gold is one of many. There's 4 others. Is that correct?
Well, I've got, I lose track. I write a lot of poetry too. I'm also a poet. So if anybody has any interest in poetry, I've got a lot of poetry books out there. And I've got another book of philosophy called The One Idea That Saves the World. And it's about how do we come together. And I'm into the human family, obviously, as a genealogist. So I'm talking about how do we come together? Yeah. How do we solve the problems that we face? And how do we be kind and respectful to each other? And
now, this is a book that you just recently wrote?
That one, I actually had a first edition several years ago, and I just did a second edition last summer, which just came out.
Which would answer some of the questions as a culture, what we're going through.
Yeah, right. Exactly. We're going through a lot in the United States as a culture, and this deals with a lot of those issues, always focused from a common sense point of view, what we can all agree on, how do we overcome the politics and the things that divide us and get to the core of what we all want, which is a healthy world.
Yeah, yeah. And if you were to put it into just sum it up into one...
Yeah, the one idea is basically what the genealogy is too. We're all interconnected and dependent upon one another for our well-being.
Yeah.
And that's the one idea. And it's pretty simple, and it's been reiterated over and over and over again throughout time, throughout history. People are talking about the same thing.
The book is filled with beautiful quotes from so many different people through the ages, wisdom people or just general people. I mean, it's just wonderful. And his idea is through the eyes of, I'm not a big, world specialist. I'm not, I'm a poet, I'm a genealogist, but I have a point of view and I think it works. And he's had, what gets me is how many people have recommended this book. It's just, it's wonderful.
Yeah.
It's a good book.
Yeah, we've often talked about on this show that, life is about relationships.
Right, absolutely.
Yes.
And I keep saying that over and over again to all of our caregivers. We have over 100 caregivers. And when they go through orientation, we just talk about really what life is all about and what is your motivation for being a caregiver. And caring for another human being is an honor. It's a privilege to be able to draw alongside of another human being. And even though they come from different backgrounds and different cultures and different time frames and on it goes, the thing that holds us all together is that being human.
And we just talked about the fractured families now and how you may not have your family around you to help you when you get to that point in life when you can't do it by yourself and you just need somebody there. And that's great.
I think the secret to life, to happiness, is healthy relationships. So healthy relationships with all the people in your life and with the planet itself, too. That's part of our relationship to being on this earth.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. And is there any one book in particular that captures that, the second edition?
Yeah.
And what's that title called again?
It's called The One Idea That Saves the World.
The subtitle is A Message of Hope in a Time of Crisis.
Okay, well, all of us on our listening audience, we all need to grab that book.
It's available. All of his books are available all over the internet, Amazon, wherever.
Yeah.
So.
Fantastic. All right. Well, is there anything else that we need? We're up against the end of the hour. Is there anything else that that's burning on your hearts that you want to get out? You two are the most amazing people. I mean, the way you're like a symphony together. It's in harmony and two different instruments. And
I just want to reiterate that. Tell your story. Your story is important, especially all the people who are aging.
That's right. Yeah.
That story that you have is so valuable to the people that will come after you, and I just encourage you to tell it for the people who come after.
And I'll tell you just quickly, he tells something in his workshops, and it just reverberates with me, because here we are doing genealogy. You're looking back 400 years to who came on the Mayflower and who did this and blah, blah, blah. Well, what do you think 400 years from now your descendants are going to want to know? They're going to want to know who you were, who lived back then, who were my ancestors. Yeah. And if you tell your story, they'll be able to know.
Yeah, and to capture that and to be able to pass that on, just like you were saying, is remarkable. So, well, we all want to be good human beings. Let's learn what it means to love, respect, and protect each other, and we can do that through our genealogy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a worthy endeavor for all of us. And I encourage our listening audience to pick up your book, Digging for Ancestral Gold. Laurence Overmire is the author. He's sitting right here next to me, and what an honor it is to be with him and his lifelong partner and wife and partner in crime, Nancy McDonald. And we all share one thing in common, is our Scottish blood.
Yay.
I love that. All right. Well, thanks again for being on Aging Today.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Mark.
And I do want to say thank you to our show sponsor, Comfort Care Home Care of West Linn, Oregon. And the Comfort Care caregivers are devoted to helping you to live your best life possible. This is Mark Turnbull, your host. Thank you for tuning in to Aging Today, the podcast where together we explore together the options to aging on your terms. Join us again next week for another lively discussion on Aging Today. Our special guest next week will be Diane Leviton, and we're going to be talking about becoming a caregiver advocate. Who, me? I don't think that's possible. Yes, it is. Remember, we're all in the process of aging, and as we age, we really are better together. So stay young at heart.
You make me feel so young. You make me feel like spring has sprung. And every time I see your face, I'm such a happy individual. The moment that you speak, I want to go play hide and seek. I want to go and bounce the moon just like a toy balloon. Well, you and I are just like a couple of tots running across the meadow, picking up lots of forget-me-nots. So you made me feel so young. You made me feel there are songs to be sung, bells to be rung, and a wonderful fling to be flung. And even when I'm old and gray.
You've been listening to Aging Today, where together we explore the options to aging on your terms. Join Mark and his guest next week for another lively discussion on proactively aging on your terms, connecting you to the professional advice of his special guests, with the goal of creating better days throughout the aging process. Your host has been Mark Turnbull. Join Mark and his guests every week on Aging Today, your podcast to exploring your options for aging on your terms.
And even when I'm old and gray, you make me feel the way I feel today. 'Cause you make me feel so. You make me feel so. You make me feel so young. So young. You make me feel so young. You make me feel so young.